Chapter 6, In the Belly of the Beast. During the bus ride to San Quentin, I remember reflecting back over my whole life and all the things I had done to get to where I was. Up until that point, my life had been a curious mix of contradictions. I had basically been desultory and reckless. I lived day to day growing up on the streets and had become recluse to the normalcies of society. The streets and the lack of growing up in a healthy environment had transformed me into an introverted, antisocial type. Truth be told, I really didn't like too many people and was easily annoyed. As I watched the sun's reflections produce thousands of small luminous flashes of lights on the waters of the San Francisco Bay, my mind now turned to where I was headed and what it would be like to be in prison at 19 years old. I was a little nervous and flustered because of the unknown. Although this was my first time in prison, I was ready to get it over with and was just raring to get there. I had become accustomed to the proclivities and routines of incarceration from the time I was a juvenile, so being locked up didn't bother me. But this was prison, and I knew it was going to be different. 7 years wasn't that long, but it was my first bid, and a lot could happen in that time. I tried to go over all the things I'd learned and picked up from some of my older homeboys in the county jail. How I was supposed to conduct myself, how to identify NR members, how to identify enemies, and some of the other things I could expect. When we finally pulled up to the front gates at San Quentin, the bus came to a complete stop and the transportation officers exited the bus. The driver entered the front gate on foot and let the gate officer know how many new inmates were being brought into the prison. The other two officers stood on opposite sides of the bus in ominous black jumpsuits, holding shotguns and waiting to be cleared inside. Once we were cleared to enter, we drove through another sally port and finally through another gate that led into the main recreational yard. I remember thinking to myself, I'm finally here, in the belly of the beast. The bus moved along at a slow, imperious speed. I got the same strange feeling I used to feel when I'd be on a roller coaster, climbing a steep incline, preparing myself for a turbulent ride. The yard was packed full of inmates, playing basketball, throwing horseshoes, lifting weights, and playing handball. There was a small sweat lodge surrounded by Native Americans. I saw small gun towers at all four perimeters of the yard. I found myself sizing up every inmate I saw, as these were the guys I felt like I would be competing with. This was my competition. My survival depended on how well I'd be able to coexist with these guys. I was young and thought I could beat up the world, so I began to feel a sense of ease when I looked at these guys, thinking that they didn't look so tough. This was a direct result of my adolescence and being blind to the pragmatical precepts of prison. Prison is a shrewd environment, not one to be underestimated, especially during the late 1980s. But I'd eventually learn this myself. It has a way of humbling the baddest of the bad, and nobody was beyond becoming a target or falling victim to its unforgiving edicts. After getting processed and giving numbers, we were escorted through the upper yard to West Block. As we walked through the courtyard in front of West Block, I began recognizing a lot of my homeboys who I was in the county jail with. By this time, I was beginning to settle in and remember thinking, this isn't so bad. Technically, the reception center usually isn't that bad unless there's a race war. Otherwise, it's not a battle zone because you're pretty much in your own backyard. Once we stepped in the West Block, the first thing you notice is the deafening noise. The noise is comparable to how loud it gets at a football or baseball stadium. They give you a pair of earplugs in your fish kit in a feeble attempt to drown out the noise level, but it doesn't work. One has to practically yell at the top of their lungs just to talk to their neighbor. For the next 10 days, you're on CTQ, confined to quarters. Your only movements consist of showers to the chow hall and back. The chow hall is usually where you run into everyone and have the opportunity to intermingle with the rest of the block. There's 3 chow halls divided into 3 separate sections. Each section holds anywhere from 200 to 300 inmates. At the top of each one is a small catwalk where the gunners walk back and forth, monitoring all movement. When I finally made it out to the courtyard after completing the 10 days of CTQ, one of my older homeboys by the name of Hector Shorty Sanchez from Folsom Park kind of laced me up and let me know what was going on. He introduced me to a lot of other Northerners there who were from all over the Bay Area. Something that caught my eye and became evident off the bat was a small group who always separated themselves and gathered in a corner. These were the NR members. Most of them were sleeved down with tattoos and carried themselves with a pervading air of eminence that set them apart from the rest. One day when I was on the exercise yard, an individual by the name of Paul Puerto Rican Puppet Olivencia approached me. He was from San Jose. Puppet saw me working out in a corner by myself and asked me where I was from. When I told him San Francisco, we started talking about other people he knew from my neighborhood and how he had met a lot of solid homeboys from Frisco in the system. That was it. That was our preamble. That's how I met him. But this was calculated. He had heard about me through my homeboy Rooster, and now everything I'd done in the county jail had contributed to my resume. Your resume is your gang career, your portfolio. Every act, every violent act, every accomplishment, every sacrifice that you have committed on behalf of the Norteño cause now becomes your portfolio, so to speak. Puppet and I became acquainted over the next few weeks, and I look forward to kicking it with him. He was older than me and had been to prison before. I looked up to him and sought guidance from him. Soon, I was trying to emulate Puppet and became very observant of how he carried himself. I wanted to develop similar characteristics. I wanted the same respect and recognition that he got. It was infectious. He was the first one who began schooling me on the Norteño struggle and other areas all surrounding mainline training. He knew this was my first time in prison and I was green, still wet behind the ears. So he went over everything with me. Whenever we go out to the exercise yard, we go into a small corner and spend the entire yard time covering as much as we could. Warfare tactics, mainline training, weaponry, security, establishing a yard, communication. We went over it all and I soaked it up like a sponge. In the beginning, it was just Puppet, but later on, another individual out of San Jose by the name of Francisco Cisco Diaz drove up and assisted Puppet in schooling me. It didn't take long for me to figure out that both of these guys were NR members, as the fundamentals of their schooling centered around the NR and other NR related topics. Cisco was in his early 30s and had also been to prison before. Like Puppet, he too was covered with tattoos. He was also very sharp and well spoken. During all chow hall movements, we made a practice of waiting for each other. This was under the axiom of security. We'd walk to the chow hall together and use this time to cover more topics. I began meeting a lot of other NR members, and soon this was all I'd surrounded myself with. They were gradually sinking their hooks in me, and I slowly became entangled in the NR's insidious tentacles. During one of these occasions, while on the exercise yard, they asked me what I thought about becoming an NR member. I've been waiting to be asked this question and didn't have to think twice before I answered. I told them this is what I was striving for and that making a commitment to the NR would be an honor to me. Based on all the conversations we had and all the things I had learned, I felt confident that I had a sound perspective on what it represented by now. I wanted to be a soldado. I wanted to be one of the ones that step up and defend the Norteño following. In my mind, I was already a soldier and I wanted to fight with the enemy. That's all I was thinking about. But the NR expected more than that. And as I would later find out, it also demanded more, much more. But at this time, I believed in their purpose. The cause sounded righteous and I didn't think about the consequences or the full extent of the commitment I'd be making. I was being sucked into the grips of what would later become an errant movement. But at the time, there was no way I could have known this. Puppet asked me to break down my understanding of the cause, and I recited everything that I had learned up until that point. My knack for memorizing the things I had been taught and articulating it impressed them. Puppet told me that he was going to put me up for membership, but that he had to run it by another brother who was on the other side of West Block. At the time, I didn't know who this was, but I assumed this must be the overall authority in West Block or someone who had more status than Puppet. In the meantime, he told me that I was going to be placed on a 90-day probationary period and that if I measured up to the expectations at the end of my probationary period, my membership would be sanctioned. Over the next couple of months, I continued absorbing whatever schooling they exposed me to and waited to get transferred to a mainline. When my ticket finally came up and they called me to pack my personal property for transfer, I stopped by Puppet's cell and asked him what would happen to my membership. I was just shy of completing my 90-day probationary period, so I wanted to know what was going to happen. He gave me a cell number on Bayside and West Block and told me to walk over there and introduce myself. He told me to ask for Chocolate and let him know that I was the one who he and Cisco had been working with. Ray Chocolate Perez was another guy out of San Jose. When I walked up to the cell, Chocolate and his cellie were in deep discussion about something, probably schooling. Chocolate was short, dark complected, had a huge star on the left side of his forehead, and wore his hair pulled back in a ponytail. I introduced myself as Boxer from Frisco and told him that I was catching the bus to Susanville. I told him that Puppet and Cisco sent me over to let him know I was leaving. Chocolate told me he was going to go ahead and sanction my membership, and that whenever I was asked who pulled me, to let the brothers know that I was pulled by him and that Puppet was my sponsor. He said, hey, when you get up there, fall in line with the household and assist with whatever you're asked to do. He welcomed me with a handshake, congratulated me, and wished me luck. That was it. I was now a fully functioning NR member, and I felt a strong sense of nobility for making this commitment. In my mind, I felt like I had just achieved something monumental, like I had just reached the pinnacle in my life. But now I wanted to earn my bones, and this is all I was thinking about. I learned early on that in the prison world, violence served as your status mobility system. You elevate your stock and move up the prestigious ladder by whacking people and spilling blood. That's the moving force. So now I had to up my stock. As I boarded the Grey Goose for Susanville, this is all I was thinking about.